We are really excited to have you guys to give the Big Ten perspective. Jake talked a lot about the SEC and if the SEC dominance era is over in college football. So I'll start you guys out with an easy, no agenda, not going to make anybody mad question. Where do y'all stand on the Big Ten versus SEC in 2025?
Go ahead, Ryan.
Oh boy, I don't know that there's an easy answer to this question because we're truly approaching we're in and we're diving further into just unprecedented territory in college football in terms of how these rosters are built, how these are constructed. And I just don't know that anyone has like a good grasp on like how to compute that. And I think a lot of this conversation started with Michigan last year, where, I mean, the go-to's always been kind of that 24/7 talent composite, right? Where it's like, well, if we put all these recruiting classes together and we add them all up, this is in theory how good each team should be. And I think that's the basis for a lot of these like Vegas style power rankings is you're taking, as much as you can, the coaching component, the intangible component, what have you, recent historical success. But a lot of it is just like the hard material on hand, right? And now that player movement is as free and easy as ever, that it's so hard to track that because a lot of these times you have on, these top 25 teams, they're getting guys from lower levels, from lower ranked Power 4 teams who are really good and weren't necessarily good high school players. So while they count as a 3-star on the talent composite, it might be, a guy who's been a 3-year starter who's going for that to that higher level to, one last chance to impress the scouts. And it's just hard to quantify like what that actually means. And it's how we're getting these weird results, right? Like, I don't think anyone had Indiana making the playoff on their bingo card heading into the year. I don't know that anyone had Illinois. I sure as hell did not have Illinois as a 9-win team on our bingo card heading into the year either. So it's so hard to predict just because you don't even know who's on rosters anymore, right? Like, so many kids going into the transfer portals, and you show up for spring practice, you look at the roster, it's like, oh, who's this? Where'd he come from? So it's just so hard to say which way it's going. And I mean, like, certainly the proof is in the pudding, right? We have a Big Ten national champion 2 years in a row. We had 3 of the final 4 teams this year were teams playing in the true Midwest of college football. But, it's all cyclical, right? It comes back next year. Oh, here's Georgia again. Texas has made a run 2 years in a row. You can never count out Alabama. So I'm interested to see what these next 5 years brings for sure. But certainly if you're a Big Ten fan, it's an exciting time to be in college football right now.
Yeah, I think Ryan makes a great point. The portal, you never know what you're going to have. And as a fan for all conferences and teams, it makes it really hard to get excited about. Like even my OU Bobcat flag back here, we were pillaged by the portal last year. And we got pillaged by the portal again this year and a new coach. So you look at that across all levels and conferences, it's really hard as a fan to, I feel like until you're past the spring portal window to get excited about your team, because the guy you may be excited about coming in to be your new running back this year, well, if spring doesn't go how he has planned, he's going to peace out and go somewhere else. And Alabama's knocking on the door with a $2 million offer. I still think, and I've thought about this a few times. I pick my friends wisely, right? No, Ryan's a Notre Dame fan. My other buddy's a Bama fan, and another buddy's a Clemson fan. So I, surround myself well here. We've talked about this though. I think the SEC is still top to bottom, the deeper and the better conference. The Big Ten though is the one that's on fire at the top, right? Like you had Michigan, undefeated season. Ohio State, albeit 2 losses, but you saw what Ohio State was supposed to be in that playoff run and be the most dominant team in the country. And now you're looking forward to 2025, and Penn State's trying to recreate that as well. And if they hit that again, like you see your path to what may be the new championship routine, or to get to the championship as a routine every year, is pay your guys to come back, get a few guys in the portal, and then see what happens. I also wonder, I think Ryan Day, he did a really good job explaining after the season about how Ohio State laid this out this year. And it was, we have to have a snap count. We have to watch the snap count, because if our goal is to go to the national championship, we got 16, maybe 17 games on the line, and we need to be able to cycle these guys through to have them fresh. And if you looked at like Judkins and Henderson, who looked to be the 2 most fresh running backs in the playoff this year, it was those 2, the force and the speed that they had. I wonder, Kirby Smart's going to jump right in on that and start implementing that if he already wasn't. Kalen DeBoer is a great coach. So the SECs and other Big Ten teams are going to try to piggyback that. But the key is the depth that you have the ability to do that. But for me right now, as much as I love the Big Ten and a Big Ten homer and a Big Ten podcaster, I think the SEC still has the crown from given top to bottom, but the Big Ten is not far behind, and I think it's closer than it's been in a very long time.
I think you're absolutely right about that. The gap is almost non-existent at this point. It does seem like we're moving closer and closer to a future where it is truly the Big Two and Power Two conferences rather than the Power Four, the Power Five. And I think both of you guys made some good points. The roster building in 2025 is so much different, and following it as a fan is so much different. And I think the Big Ten, where they really have a leg up on the SEC right now, is just the continuity factor. Yes, they brought in a lot of new schools that are trying to figure things out, and the travel element in the Big Ten is definitely something that's a bigger thing to figure out for coaches than it is in the SEC, where it's a little bit more regional. But from a continuity standpoint, Ryan Day's been there for a long time. James Franklin's been there for a long time. You look at the powers of the SEC. Sharon Moore even has been at Michigan for a long time, even if he hasn't been a head coach. You look at the SEC, Kirby Smart's been there for a long time, but Kalen DeBoer is entering year 2. Lane Kiffin's been there for a while, but kind of seems like he's hit a ceiling at Ole Miss of what he can potentially do there. Steve Sarkisian's, I think, in year 4 now at Texas, or you're going into year 5, but first year in a new conference. So just a lot of change and a lot of things to figure out in the SEC. And with all the craziness of college football, it does seem like the Big Ten benefited from that continuity from some more steady hands that have been in place for quite some time.
Well, and you have to think too about how like the median team in each conference is constructed. For the longest time, you never like Ohio State's been the class of the Big Ten since Urban Meyer started there. Like he revolutionized how a Big Ten roster is built. He brought that SEC roster building up north. And I don't know that you could argue maybe some aspect of Michigan over the last like 3 months of the season is starting to implement that a little bit. But traditionally, like there was no one else in the Big Ten who really followed suit with that. It was more so just, hey, we're going to scout our areas. We're going to count on our guys finding some diamonds in the rough, and we're going to count on building up our roster that way. And because of that, it just feels like as a conference as a whole, the Big Ten, top to bottom, there's just a lot more patience with the administrations, which allows for that continuity to stick around. Whereas you look at like the SEC, where it's, any given year in the top 25 of the 24/7 composite recruiting rankings, you probably have like 11 SEC teams in there. You have a lot more teams down south who are recruiting on a level to potentially compete for a national title than the Big Ten does. Plus, you had the boogeyman there in Nick Saban for the longest time, who everyone was just chasing. Like, what success looks like. Like, how many coaches did Auburn fire just because they weren't Nick Saban? Like, there's so much of that going on in the SEC, and you have these programs that realistically, especially now that, the big money's coming through, and you have some of these big money guys at northern schools who are starting to throw their money around a little bit. Like, how many teams in the South truly have the resources to be able to compete if we're getting like everyone's above board throwing dollars around? So, I mean, that's kind of the other aspect of it too. And now we saw, I think, a little bit this offseason, maybe some cooler heads are prevailing now that money is having to go to the players, specifically from athletic departments. Maybe a guy like, a Lincoln Riley, who 5 years ago, maybe USC with a new AD was like, you know what, screw it, we're going to fire this guy. I don't care how much money it costs. And now they're like, well, we got this $20 million tab coming down that we got to give our players. Maybe we should give this guy one more chance. So I'm fascinated. I mean, there's so many different variables that go into it too, but I think that traditional just patience of, hey, Purdue, maybe that's not a good example because they just fired Ryan Walters after 2 years, but like Brett Bielema last year has a terrible year and he comes into this year and it's like, whereas if that was like Ole Miss or something, maybe someone writes a check to throw him out to pasture and, it's Illinois. They're like, whatever, Brett, get it together. And they have a really great year this year because of it. So I'm fascinated to see if maybe now that there's this pay the players component straight from the athletic departments, if maybe some more patience is going to come to the SEC to allow that staff continuity to continue to build up.
Well, I mentioned it briefly, but as Midwestern, Big Ten / Notre Dame / Midwestern guys, How did it feel with all of those new West Coast teams added to the fray this year?
Big change, man. Ryan grew up on the West Coast actually, so I am the true Big Ten lifer of this podcast. Big change, and we've heard about it for a couple of years now, right on and off. Like, who they going to add? Who they going to add? We're going to go to the Big 12 and get Kansas and yada yada. And it's like, I kind of like what I have. Like, I enjoy what the Big Ten was, but as far as the 4 teams I think that you could have gotten, I think you swung pretty good in adding Oregon, who carries Nike, and Phil Knight, which we've seen with their NIL packages. They can pretty much buy whoever they want, to the point now where on Oregon messaging boards we're saying, Phil Knight, blank check, Brian Hartline, come be our wide receivers coach. I'm like, what? Excuse me? Like, you can't buy everything. And then, Washington had some playoff runs, last year into the national championship. Was it the third year of the playoff? Got their doors blown off by Alabama, but they've been there. UCLA and USC, a package deal with the history. I grew up watching Ohio State play USC a few times in the regular season and not go well for the Buckeyes. So it's exciting brands to bring to the Midwest. I still think it's a shock to a lot of us. I think adjusting to the amount of travel, right, that your team has to do, and how unfavorable that may be for, let's say, like lesser of the Big Ten, like a Rutgers and Maryland and teams like that don't have the depth, that got to fly to Oregon and face a team like that. It's not going to be a pretty situation at this point. But as far as brands, man, I'm excited to have them. I was a secret closet mini Duck fan for a while, and now they've joined the Big Ten. I can't like them anymore because I'm a Buckeye fan, but I'm really excited about the addition of them. And Ryan, I know you started out West, and you've now seen the West come to the Midwest. So
can I be honest? It kind of sucks. I just and maybe this is an old man yells at cloud thing where it's like, change is happening, stupid, just embrace it or get out. But growing up with college football being such a regional sport, losing that regionality of it for the sake of just making better game. Well, let's be honest, it's for better rated games to make more money for television partners. That's the reason why this is happening. And the first year was really cool, right? Like, Oregon's in the big house. They're making a late November trip to Camp Randall, and Michigan's playing out in Seattle. Penn State's playing in the Coliseum. Like, these are cool matchups to see for the first time. I would much rather see them as like a beginning of the year, like Big 10 Pac-12 challenge or something like that. And it's just like, I'm approaching this from the angle of the Notre Dame fan who spent the last 10 years watching his team play garbage ACC teams as part of a scheduling agreement, that I just have I don't care about Virginia. I don't care about Wake Forest or NC State or UNC. It's like, sure, some of these teams have been capable of rising up and giving a good game or having a good season. And it's at the first couple times it happens, like, cool, that's a compelling matchup. And then you get 7, 8, 9 years into it, and it's like, I just don't care about any of these teams. When I'm growing up and they're playing Michigan State every year, Purdue every year, Michigan every year, you have these rivalries that you grow up on, and now they just don't really exist anymore. Like, think about the sport as a whole, man. Like, we went, 10 years, 12 years without Texas A&M because of petty conference affiliation things, and we lost Bedlam now, and we might be losing the Apple Cup and the Civil War and all these other things that are just going by the wayside for the name of, television conferences. And it's just kind of sucky. And I mean, you know what? I really enjoyed the games this year, so maybe that makes me a little bit of a hypocrite. But I think we're going to get 10 years down the line when it's the AFC and the NFC of college football, and everyone's like, man, I really miss those days when I could, stay up until 10:30 and watch Washington State and Oregon State play a 52-49 shootout, and it means something. And now it's just, there's two independent programs that don't really mean anything in the grand scheme. Who cares?
I'm right there with you. And, coming from a school, like I went to Texas A&M, we were one of the schools that spearheaded the first round of realignment 10, 15 years ago, right? And that one felt a little different because moving to the SEC, we had some historical ties with the LSUs and Arkansas of the world.
Mm-hmm.
We were leaving behind Texas. That was a whole huge thing, obviously, but it did feel more culturally similar going to the SEC, right? Like I felt like we had more in common with the Auburns and Mississippi States of the world than the Colorados and Iowa States of the world, for better or worse, right? When we were in the Big 12. But this new era is totally spurred by television. We can't even pretend like it's not anymore. And it does feel weird. It feels weird. I catch myself turning on random basketball games now in February, and it's like Purdue or Oregon played at Michigan State. And I'm like, oh, that's a weird game in the middle of February. Oh no, that's a Big Ten game, and Michigan State needs that one to keep fighting for the Big Ten championship. But yeah, it's a weird time to be, and I appreciate you guys' perspective on that, and appreciate the honesty, Ryan, because it is weird, and it feels weird, and sometimes it just feels like we are selling out to get these matchups.
Gracious him! How about